The autumn sun cast long shadows across Riverside High School as 17-year-old Maya Rodriguez walked through the front doors for what felt like the 100th first day of her life. Being a military brat meant constant relocations, new faces, and the exhausting ritual of starting over. But this time felt different. This time, her father, Colonel James Rodriguez, had promised they'd stay put until she graduated. This small Colorado town of Cedar Falls would finally be home. Maya adjusted her worn leather jacket, a gift from her father before his last deployment, and scanned the crowded hallway. Students clustered in their established groups, shooting curious glances at the newcomer. She'd learned long ago not to take it personally. In military communities, everyone understood the transient nature of relationships. But civilian schools? That was different territory entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya's first 3 classes passed in a blur of introductions and cautious smiles from teachers who'd clearly been briefed about the new student. By lunch, she'd managed to exchange pleasantries with a few classmates, but nothing that resembled genuine connection. The cafeteria buzzed with the familiar soundtrack of teenage life, laughter, gossip, the occasional dramatic outburst that would be forgotten by tomorrow. She grabbed a turkey sandwich and chocolate milk, scanning for an empty table. That's when she spotted them. 4 boys huddled around a corner table, their eyes tracking her movement with predatory interest. Maya recognized the type immediately. Every school had them. The boys who mistook aggression for charisma, who fed off making others uncomfortable. The apparent leader, a stocky kid with bleached tips and an expensive Letterman jacket, nudged his friends as Maya passed. "Fresh meat," she heard him whisper, followed by snickers that made her skin crawl. Maya had encountered bullies before, but something about this group felt more menacing than usual. She found a quiet table near the windows and tried to focus on her sandwich, but she could feel their stares boring into her back. This was exactly what she'd hoped to avoid. In military communities, respect was earned through character and actions. Here, it seemed like a more complex social hierarchy governed interactions, one she hadn't quite decoded yet. After lunch came chemistry class, where Maya found herself partnered with a soft-spoken girl named Emma, who seemed grateful for a lab partner who actually paid attention. Emma had kind eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses and an easy smile that put Maya at ease. "Those boys at lunch," Emma said quietly, as they measured solutions. "That's Brad Hutchinson and his crew. They think they run the school because Brad's dad owns the biggest car dealership in town. Just be careful around them." Maya nodded, appreciating the warning. She'd dealt with entitled bullies before, but something in Emma's tone suggested these boys were particularly problematic. "Thanks for the heads up. I'm used to handling myself, but it's good to know what I'm dealing with." Emma glanced around nervously before continuing. "They have this thing about new girls, especially ones who don't immediately fall all over them. Last year, they made Sarah Jenkins' life miserable until her family moved away. The teachers know, but Brad's family has too much influence in this town." The final bell couldn't come too soon. Maya gathered her books and headed for the exit, relieved to escape the suffocating atmosphere of teenage politics. The parking lot buzzed with after-school activity, students climbing into cars, athletes heading to practice, drama club members gesticulating wildly about their latest production. She'd almost made it to the sidewalk when she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that seemed designed to intimidate. Maya didn't turn around, but she slowed her pace, every instinct her father had taught her about situational awareness kicking into high gear. "Hey, new girl," a voice called out. Brad's voice, she realized with a sinking feeling. "Not so fast." Maya stopped and turned around slowly, keeping her expression neutral. Brad approached with his 3 friends flanking him like backup dancers in some twisted music video. Up close, she could see the calculated cruelty in his eyes, the way he sized her up like she was something to be conquered rather than a person deserving basic respect. "Welcome to Cedar Falls," Brad said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "My name's Brad Hutchinson. This is Tyler, Josh, and Marcus." He gestured to his friends, who nodded in turn like trained seals. "We like to personally welcome all the new students, especially the pretty ones." Maya's jaw tightened at the condescending tone, but she kept her voice level. "Thanks, but I'm fine finding my own way around." Brad's smirk widened at Maya's response, clearly interpreting her polite deflection as a challenge rather than a boundary. He stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that made her skin crawl. His friends formed a loose semicircle behind him, effectively blocking her path to the street. "Oh, come on now," Brad said, his voice dripping with false charm. "Don't be like that. We're just being friendly. New girl like you probably doesn't know all the ins and outs of Cedar Falls yet. Lucky for you, I'm an expert tour guide." Tyler, a lanky boy with acne scars and a cruel laugh, chimed in. "Yeah, Brad knows all the best spots, the good restaurants, the fun parties, places where someone like you could really fit in." The way he emphasized the last 2 words made Maya's stomach turn. Maya had been in enough situations like this to recognize the script. They were testing her, seeing how she'd react to their intimidation tactics. In her experience, boys like this typically back down when confronted with confidence, but something about the gleeful malice in their eyes suggested they might be different. "I appreciate the offer," Maya said firmly, "but I really need to get going. My dad's expecting me home." Josh, a heavy-set boy with a buzz cut and a football team t-shirt, laughed. "Daddy's girl, huh? What's he gonna do if you're a little late? Ground you?" The other boys snickered at his joke, clearly enjoying the dynamic they'd established. Maya felt her patience wearing thin. She'd moved 17 times in her life, dealt with culture shock, language barriers, and the constant stress of being the outsider. But she'd never encountered boys quite this persistent in their harassment. Most bullies lost interest when their target didn't provide the reaction they wanted. "Look," she said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she'd learned from watching her father address subordinates. "I'm not interested in whatever this is. I just want to get home." Brad's expression darkened at her demanding tone. Clearly, he wasn't used to being spoken to with such directness, especially by someone he viewed as beneath him in the school's social hierarchy. He glanced at his friends, seeming to draw confidence from their presence. "You know what your problem is?" Brad said, stepping even closer. "You think you're better than us, just because you're new, just because you've got that whole mysterious outsider thing going on. But let me tell you something about Cedar Falls. Respect is earned here, and right now, you're being pretty disrespectful." Marcus, who had been quiet until now, nodded sagely, as if Brad had just delivered profound wisdom. "Yeah, we're just trying to be nice. Most girls would be grateful for attention from us." Maya almost laughed at the absurdity of the statement, but she caught herself. These boys clearly had inflated opinions of themselves, probably reinforced by a social structure that rewarded their behavior rather than challenging it. She thought about Emma's warning and Sarah Jenkins, the girl who'd been forced to move away. "Grateful?" Maya repeated, unable to keep the incredulity out of her voice. "For what exactly? For cornering me in a parking lot? For making me uncomfortable? That's not being nice, that's being intimidating." The word intimidating seemed to strike a nerve. Brad's face flushed red, and his friends shifted uncomfortably. Apparently, no one had ever called them out so directly before. Maya realized she might have miscalculated. Instead of backing down, Brad seemed energized by her defiance. "Intimidating?" Brad repeated with a harsh laugh. "You think this is intimidating? You have no idea what intimidating looks like. Maybe someone needs to teach you about respect the hard way."
Tyler and Josh moved closer, and Maya felt the first real spike of fear. This wasn't just typical teenage posturing anymore. These boys seemed genuinely angry that she dared to stand up to them. She glanced around the parking lot, noting that most students had already left. The few remaining were too far away to hear what was happening. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Maya said, trying to de-escalate the situation. "I'm not trying to disrespect anyone. I just want to go home." "See, that's where you're wrong," Brad said, his voice taking on a menacing quality. "You disrespected us the moment you walked into our school thinking you were too good to talk to us. And in Cedar Falls, respect has consequences." Maya's mind raced through her options. She could try to push past them, but there were 4 of them, and they clearly weren't going to let her leave easily. She could scream, but she wasn't sure anyone would hear her or respond quickly enough. She could try to continue reasoning with them, but Brad seemed past the point of rational discussion. What she really wanted was to channel her father's commanding presence, to tap into that military authority that could make grown soldiers snap to attention. But she was just a 17-year-old girl facing down 4 boys who seemed determined to make her life miserable. "What kind of consequences?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Brad's grin returned, but it was uglier now, full of malicious intent. "Oh, you'll find out soon enough. See, every new girl thinks she can just walk into our town and act like she owns the place. But Cedar Falls has a way of teaching outsiders their place."
The parking lot seemed to grow quieter as the standoff continued, the usual after-school bustle fading into an uncomfortable silence. Maya could hear her own heartbeat in her ears as she assessed her situation. 4 boys, each bigger than her, blocking her exit. No teachers in sight, no other students close enough to intervene. She thought about her father, probably sitting in his office at Fort Carson right now, reviewing training schedules or attending meetings about deployment logistics. Colonel James Rodriguez had taught his daughter to be strong, to stand up for herself, but he'd also taught her to be smart about choosing her battles. This felt like a battle she couldn't win through confrontation alone. "You know what I think?" Brad continued, clearly enjoying his perceived position of power. "I think you need a proper introduction to Cedar Falls culture, and I think McDonald's would be the perfect place for that education." Tyler laughed. "Oh man, remember when we took Jessica there sophomore year? She learned real quick about small-town hospitality." Maya's blood ran cold at the implication. Whatever they'd done to Jessica, it was clearly something they found amusing, and she would find traumatic. She glanced toward the street, calculating her chances of making a run for it. The boys seemed to notice her looking for escape routes because they shifted position to further block her path. "Don't even think about it," Josh warned with a cruel smile. "We're just getting started here." Maya forced herself to stay calm, drawing on every lesson her father had taught her about handling pressure situations. Colonel Rodriguez always said that panic was the enemy of clear thinking, and clear thinking was what would get her out of this safely. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Look, guys," Maya said, trying one more time to reason with them. "I really don't want any trouble. I'm just trying to get through my senior year like everyone else. Can't we just start over?" Brad pretended to consider this, stroking his chin theatrically. Start over. That's an interesting proposal. But here's the thing. You already made your first impression, and it wasn't great. So now you need to make it up to us." "Make it up to you how?" Maya asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Simple. Come with us to McDonald's, buy us dinner, sit there and listen while we explain how things work around here. Do that, and maybe we'll consider letting you have a fresh start." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, think of it as a welcome dinner. New girl pays, we all get to know each other better." Maya realized this was probably how they had trapped Jessica and who knows how many other girls. The initial request seemed reasonable enough, just buying dinner for some classmates, but she could imagine how quickly it would escalate once they had her isolated in a public place where she'd feel pressured to comply with increasingly unreasonable demands. "And if I say no?" she asked. Brad's expression hardened again. "Well, that would be disappointing. See, we've been really patient with you so far. We've been polite, friendly, welcoming. But if you keep rejecting our hospitality, well, that would be disappointing." Tyler picked up the thread. "Let's just say that Cedar Falls is a small town. Everyone talks to everyone. And if word gets around that the new girl is stuck up, thinks she's too good for the locals, well, that could make your senior year pretty lonely." Josh added, "Plus, we know all the teachers, all the coaches. Our families have been here for generations. Your family, you're just passing through, right? Military brat?" The way he said it made it sound like an insult. Maya felt a surge of anger at the dismissive way he'd referred to her military background, but she forced herself to stay focused on the immediate problem. These boys clearly had no understanding of the sacrifices military families made, the strength it took to constantly adapt to new environments, the resilience required to build a life around serving something greater than yourself. But explaining that to them would be pointless. They weren't interested in understanding her perspective or treating her with basic human decency. They saw her as entertainment, a new toy to play with until they got bored or she broke. "So what's it gonna be, new girl? Easy way or hard way?" Maya looked at each of them in turn, memorizing their faces, their postures, the way they seemed to feed off each other's cruelty. She thought about Sarah Jenkins, who'd been forced to move away. She thought about Jessica, who'd apparently been subjected to some kind of humiliation at McDonald's. And she thought about all the girls who'd probably suffered in silence rather than stand up to these boys. But mostly, she thought about her father, Colonel James Rodriguez, who'd taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear, who'd shown her that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do. "Fine," Maya said quietly. "I'll come to McDonald's with you." The boys exchanged triumphant glances, clearly pleased with their victory. Brad clapped his hands together. "See? Was that so hard? We're going to have a great time getting to know each other." As they began walking toward Brad's oversized pickup truck, Maya pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to her father. "Hey Dad, stopping at McDonald's with some classmates. Might be a little late getting home." She hit send and slipped the phone back into her pocket, hoping that her father's military training would pick up on the subtle cues in her message. Colonel Rodriguez always said that the best soldiers were the ones who knew when to call for backup. Maya had no idea that her simple text was about to set in motion a chain of events that would become legendary in Cedar Falls, a story that would be told and retold for years to come. As she climbed into the back seat of Brad's oversized pickup truck, surrounded by boys who thought they'd found easy prey, she couldn't have imagined that help was already on the way. And that help was coming in the form of an M1 Abrams tank. The ride to McDonald's felt like the longest 10 minutes of Maya's life. Brad had insisted she sit in the middle of the back seat, squeezed between Tyler and Marcus, while Josh rode shotgun. The truck reeked of cheap cologne and energy drinks, and the boys kept up a steady stream of conversation clearly designed to make her uncomfortable. "So Maya," Tyler said, his voice artificially casual, "what's it like having a military dad? Does he, march around the house barking orders?" Before Maya could answer, Marcus chimed in. "I bet he's one of those strict dads who cleans his gun every time a boy comes over. Good thing he's not here right now, right, guys?" The boys erupted in laughter at what they clearly thought was hilarious wit. Maya stared straight ahead, focusing on the familiar golden arches growing larger in the distance. McDonald's, a symbol of American consistency that she'd seen in dozens of towns across the country. She'd never imagined it would become the setting for what felt like a hostage situation. "Come on, don't be so quiet," Brad called from the driver's seat, making eye contact with her in the rearview mirror. "We're all friends here. Tell us about your dad. What's his rank? What's he do?" Maya hesitated. Part of her wanted to tell them exactly who her father was: Colonel James Rodriguez, decorated combat veteran, tank commander, a man who'd earned the respect of everyone he'd ever served with. But another part of her realized that information might just make things worse. Boys like this often took military authority as a personal challenge. "He's in the Army," she said simply. Josh turned around in his seat to face her. "That's it? Come on, new girl. We're trying to get to know you. What kind of army? Like, does he push papers around an office? Or is he one of those hardcore soldier guys?" "He serves his country," Maya said, her voice carrying more edge than she had intended. "That's what matters." Brad pulled into McDonald's parking lot, choosing a space far from the entrance and close to the dumpsters. Maya noticed there were only a few other cars, mostly elderly couples and a mom with young kids. No one who looked like they'd be particularly helpful if things went sideways. "Wow, sensitive subject," Brad said as he turned off the engine. "Don't worry, we're not judging. Some people's dads are heroes, some are just regular guys trying to get by. Nothing wrong with either one." The condescending tone made Maya's hands clench into fists. These boys had no idea what they were talking about, no understanding of sacrifice or service or what it meant to dedicate your life to something bigger than yourself, but arguing with them would only make things worse. As they walked toward the entrance, Maya caught a glimpse of her reflection in the restaurant's windows. She looked smaller than usual, diminished somehow by the circumstances. That wasn't who she wanted to be. That wasn't who her father had raised her to be. Inside McDonald's, the fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh relief. The familiar smell of French fries and disinfectant filled the air, along with the ambient noise of soft rock music and conversation. Brad steered our group toward a corner booth, the same kind of isolated spot where Maya imagined they'd tormented Jessica and who knows how many other girls. "Okay, new girl," Brad said, sliding into the booth across from her while his friends flanked her on both sides. "Here's how this works. You're buying, we're eating, and we're all going to have a nice long chat about your future at Cedar Falls High." Tyler grabbed a menu from the table dispenser, scanning it with exaggerated care. I'm thinking Big Mac meal, large fries, large Coke, maybe some nuggets on the side. What about you guys?" Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Oh yeah, and apple pies, definitely apple pies. Maya's treating, so we might as well make it count." Maya realized they were deliberately running up the bill, adding insult to injury. But what choice did she have? She was trapped in a booth with no easy way out, surrounded by boys who clearly enjoyed her discomfort. "Fine," she said quietly. "Order whatever you want." As they placed their orders, Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it quickly. A response from her father that simply read, "On my way, stay calm." Relief flooded through her. Colonel Rodriguez might not know exactly what was happening, but her message had clearly conveyed that she needed help. She had no idea how he'd find her or what he'd do when he got there, but knowing backup was coming made everything more bearable. "Who's texting you?" Josh asked suspiciously. "Not calling Daddy for help, are you?" "Just letting him know where I am," Maya said truthfully. Brad leaned forward, his expression suddenly serious. "You know, that brings up an important point. See, what happens at McDonald's stays at McDonald's. This is just friends getting to know each other. No need to involve parents or teachers or anyone else who might misunderstand the situation." The threat was clear. Maya nodded, but internally she was counting down the minutes until her father arrived. Colonel Rodriguez had never failed her before, and she didn't think he was going to start now.
The food arrived with typical McDonald's efficiency, carried by a teenage employee who looked about Maya's age. The girl, her name tag read Stephanie, gave Maya a curious look as she distributed the orders. Maybe she recognized the dynamic at the table, the way Maya sat rigid and uncomfortable while the boys lounged with predatory satisfaction. "Enjoy your meal," Stephanie said, her eyes lingering on Maya for just a moment longer than necessary. As soon as she was gone, Brad clapped his hands together. "All right, now that we're all comfortable, let's talk about your integration into Cedar Falls society." Tyler bit into his Big Mac with exaggerated relish. Yeah, there is some unwritten rules you need to understand if you want to survive senior year. Maya picked at her own food, her stomach too twisted with anxiety to manage more than a few bites. Outside the window, she could see the parking lot and the street beyond, searching for any sign of her father's arrival. How would he even find her? Cedar Falls had 3 different McDonald's locations. Rule number 1, Josh said, pointing a French fry at her for emphasis. Respect the hierarchy. Brad's dad owns the biggest business in town. My dad's the football coach. Tyler's mom runs the school board. We're not just random kids. We're Cedar Falls royalty. Marcus nodded sagely. And royalty deserves respect. When we talk to you in the halls, you smile. When we invite you to parties, you're grateful. When we ask for favors, you do them. The entitled arrogance was breathtaking. Maya had lived on military bases around the world, places where rank and hierarchy actually mattered, where respect was earned through service and sacrifice. These boys had no idea what real authority looked like. What kind of favors? Maya asked, dreading the answer. Brad's grin turned wolfish. Oh, all kinds. Homework help, lunch money, maybe some personal services. Don't worry, we'll start small. Gotta break you in gradually. The implications made Maya's skin crawl. She glanced toward the counter, where Stephanie was wiping down surfaces and stealing concerned looks in their direction. The girl seemed to understand that something wasn't right, but what could a teenage McDonald's employee do against 4 high school boys? See, here's what you don't understand yet, Tyler said, leaning uncomfortably close. Military brats like you come and go, but families like ours, we've been here for generations. We own this town. Cross us, and your senior year becomes a nightmare. Plus, Josh added, we know everybody. Teachers, principals, cops, parents. You try to cause trouble for us, and it comes right back to bite you. Remember what happened to Sarah Jenkins? Maya remembered Emma's warning about Sarah, the girl who'd been forced to move away. What happened to her? The boys exchanged meaningful glances, clearly enjoying having an audience for their past victories. Brad leaned back in his seat, adopting the pose of someone about to tell a favorite story. Poor Sarah, he said with mock sympathy. New girl, just like you. Pretty, smart, thought she was too good for us. We tried to be nice, tried to welcome her to the community, but she kept rebuffing our friendship. Tyler picked up the narrative, so we had to get creative. Started small, rumors about why her family really moved to Cedar Falls. Maybe her dad wasn't just transferred, maybe he was running from something. Maybe there were problems at their last base. Amazing how fast gossip spreads in a small town. Suddenly, nobody wanted to be friends with the girl whose family had problems. Teachers started treating her differently. Other parents didn't want their kids associating with her. Josh nodded approvingly. And when she tried to fight back, tried to tell people the truth, well, who were they going to believe? 4 upstanding local boys or some outsider making wild accusations? Maya felt sick. They'd systematically destroyed a girl's reputation and social life, all because she had refused to submit to their demands. And they were clearly proud of it, treating it like some kind of strategic victory. The beauty of it, Brad continued, is that we never actually did anything wrong, never laid a hand on her, never broke any rules, just influenced public opinion, made her life unpleasant enough that her family decided to transfer again. And the best part, Tyler added with a cruel laugh, her dad was just a sergeant, low-ranking guy with no connections, no influence. Nobody important cared what happened to them. The pointed way Tyler said sergeant made it clear they were probing for information about her own father's rank. She realized they were trying to assess whether Colonel Rodriguez posed any threat to their little kingdom. Before she could formulate a response, her phone buzzed again. Another text from her father. ETA 5 minutes. Duck. Maya frowned at the message. Duck? What did that mean? And then, despite everything, she almost smiled. Her father wasn't just coming to rescue her, he was planning something dramatic.
the kind of statement that would ensure these boys never forgot this encounter. "Something funny?" Brad asked, noticing her expression. "Just thinking about how much my dad's going to enjoy meeting you guys," Maya said, truthfully. The boys laughed, completely misunderstanding her meaning. They thought she was surrendering, accepting their version of how things worked in Cedar Falls. They had no idea that Colonel James Rodriguez was about to give them an education in real authority. Outside, Maya could hear a sound that didn't quite belong in suburban Colorado. A deep, rumbling noise that seemed to be getting closer. The boys were too focused on their intimidation tactics to notice, but Maya's ears were trained to recognize military vehicles. Her father wasn't coming in a regular car. The rumbling sound grew louder, deep, and mechanical, unlike anything typically heard on Cedar Falls' quiet streets. A few other customers in the McDonald's began glancing toward the windows, their conversations pausing as they tried to identify the source of the noise. Maya knew exactly what it was. Her father had always told her that psychological warfare was just as important as conventional tactics. Sometimes, he'd said, the best way to win a battle was to make such an overwhelming show of force that the enemy surrendered before the first shot was fired. Colonel Rodriguez was clearly applying that philosophy to high school bullying. "What's that noise?" Josh asked, finally noticing the disturbance outside. Tyler craned his neck toward the window. "Sounds like construction equipment or something. Maybe they're fixing the road." But Maya could see the confusion in their eyes. This wasn't construction equipment. This was something much more serious, much more powerful. And it was getting closer. "Anyway," Brad said, trying to regain control of the conversation, "where were we?" "Oh yeah, talking about your future social integration. See, Maya, the thing about Cedar Falls is..." He never finished the sentence. The M1 Abrams tank rolled into the McDonald's parking lot with the unstoppable authority of 70 tons of American military engineering. Its massive treads crushed loose gravel as it maneuvered between parked cars with surprising precision, finally coming to rest directly in front of the restaurant's main entrance. The McDonald's fell completely silent. Every conversation stopped. Every customer turned to stare out the windows at the most advanced main battle tank in the U.S. military arsenal, sitting in a suburban fast food parking lot like something out of a fever dream. Brad's mouth hung open in shock. Tyler had frozen mid-chew, a half-eaten French fry dangling from his fingers. Josh made a small whimpering sound. Marcus looked like he might throw up. Maya couldn't help but smile. The tank's main gun, a 120mm smoothbore cannon capable of penetrating the heaviest enemy armor, slowly traversed until it pointed directly at the restaurant's main entrance. Not threatening exactly, but impossible to ignore. The message was clear. Someone very serious had arrived, and they weren't in the mood for games. What the hell is that?" Tyler whispered. Through the restaurant's windows, Maya could see other customers pulling out their phones, recording videos of the surreal scene. This was definitely going to end up on social media. By tomorrow, everyone in Cedar Falls would know about the day a tank rolled up to McDonald's. The tank's commander hatch opened with a metallic clang that somehow managed to be audible even through the restaurant's walls. A figure emerged, tall, commanding, wearing the distinctive digital camouflage of Army combat uniform. Even from a distance, Maya could see the silver eagle insignia of a full colonel gleaming on his chest. Colonel James Rodriguez had arrived. He climbed down from the tank with practiced efficiency, his movements sharp and purposeful. Every line of his bearing screamed military authority, the kind of presence that made enlisted soldiers straighten their spines and officers double-check their appearance. Maya watched her father survey the McDonald's parking lot with the same tactical assessment he'd used to evaluate a battlefield. His gaze swept over the civilian cars, the building exits, the sight lines, and potential obstacles. Then his eyes found the window where Maya sat, and his expression shifted from professional analysis to something much more personal, much more dangerous. "Oh God," Josh breathed. Is that your dad?" Maya stood up from the booth, no longer caring that the boys were blocking her path. They were too terrified to stop her anyway. "Yeah," she said simply. "That's my dad." Colonel Rodriguez strode across the parking lot with the measured pace of someone who'd walked through actual war zones. He pushed through the McDonald's entrance, the door chime sounding absurdly cheerful in contrast to his imposing presence. He was not a particularly large man in terms of pure physical dimensions, but he filled the space in a way that made everyone else seem smaller. Maya had seen this effect before, the way that her father's sheer force of personality could dominate a room without him saying a word. He stopped just inside the entrance, his eyes scanning the interior until they locked onto Maya's corner booth. The boys seemed to shrink under his gaze, suddenly looking like the immature teenagers they actually were, instead of the intimidating predators they had pretended to be. Colonel Rodriguez approached their table with deliberate steps, each footfall echoing in the unnaturally quiet restaurant. Maya noticed that other customers were openly staring now, phones out, recording what was clearly about to become the most talked about incident in Cedar Falls history. When he reached their booth, Colonel Rodriguez didn't immediately speak. He simply stood there, radiating the kind of authority that couldn't be faked or inherited or bought with daddy's money. This was power earned through decades of service, forged in combat zones, and tempered by the responsibility of leading soldiers in life-and-death situations. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying the clear diction and unmistakable command presence of career military leadership. "Gentlemen," Colonel Rodriguez said, the words somehow managing to sound both polite and deeply sarcastic, "I believe you've been entertaining my daughter." The boys couldn't even manage to respond. Brad, who was so confident and controlling just moments before, now looked like he might wet himself. Tyler had gone completely pale. Josh was trembling visibly. Marcus appeared to be having trouble breathing. Maya couldn't help but realize this was what real power looked like. Not the petty social dominance these boys had wielded over their classmates, but the genuine authority of someone who'd earned respect through service, sacrifice, and competence. "Maya," Colonel Rodriguez continued, his tone shifting to something warmer when he addressed his daughter, "are you ready to go home?" "Yes, sir," Maya replied, the formal response automatic after 17 years as a military daughter. As she stood to leave, Colonel Rodriguez's attention returned to the boys. His expression hadn't changed, but somehow the temperature in the restaurant seemed to drop several degrees. "I understand you boys have been discussing my daughter's future at Cedar Falls High School. I thought I might contribute to that conversation."
The silence that followed Colonel Rodriguez's words was deafening. Even the soft rock music playing over McDonald's speakers seemed to have faded into background static. The boys sat frozen in their booth, each one apparently trying to process the surreal turn their afternoon had taken. Maya had seen her father in command situations before, but never quite like this. Usually, his authority was exercised within the structured hierarchy of military life, where ranks and protocols provided a framework for interactions. Here, in a suburban McDonald's, surrounded by terrified teenagers and recording smartphones, Colonel Rodriguez was operating in uncharted territory. But he was adapting with the same tactical flexibility that had made him successful in combat zones. "Let me introduce myself properly," Colonel Rodriguez continued, his voice carrying the same conversational tone one might use to discuss the weather. "Colonel James Rodriguez, United States Army, currently stationed at Fort Carson. I command the 3rd Armored Brigade Combat Team." He paused, letting the weight of his credentials sink in. "Perhaps you noticed my ride in the parking lot." Through the windows, the M1 Abrams tank squatted like a sleeping dinosaur, its presence so incongruous in the peaceful suburban setting that it almost seemed like a hallucination. Maya could see other customers taking selfies with it in the background, their faces filled with wonder and excitement rather than fear. Brad finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a squeak.
Sir, we were just being friendly, welcoming Maya to town. Colonel Rodriguez tilted his head slightly, a gesture Maya recognized as dangerous. Her father used that exact expression when someone was about to receive a lecture they'd never forget. Friendly, the colonel repeated thoughtfully. That's interesting. See, gentlemen, I've spent 25 years in the United States Army. I've served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and a few other places I'm not allowed to tell you about. In that time, I've learned to recognize many different types of behavior. His gaze swept over each boy in turn. And what I observed through these windows for the past 10 minutes, that didn't look friendly to me. Tyler made the mistake of trying to defend their actions. We just invited her to dinner, sir. We paid for her food and everything. Maya almost laughed at the blatant lie. She'd been the one forced to pay for their meals, but apparently Tyler was hoping her father hadn't witnessed that particular detail. Colonel Rodriguez's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle straightening that every soldier would recognize as the calm before the storm. Son, he said quietly, I've spent 25 years in the United States Army. I've served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and a few other places I'm not allowed to tell you about. In that time, I've learned to recognize many different types of behavior. His gaze swept over each boy in turn. And what I observed through these windows for the past 10 minutes, that didn't look friendly to me. Josh tried desperately to salvage the situation. Sir, we don't understand how things work here. This is just how kids interact in Cedar Falls. We weren't trying to hurt anyone. Colonel Rodriguez turned his full attention to Josh, and Maya saw the boy physically recoil from the intensity of her father's stare. How things work here, the colonel repeated. That's fascinating. Tell me, son, what's your father's name? Mike Peterson? Josh stammered. He coaches football at the high school. Mike Peterson, Colonel Rodriguez mused. I'll be sure to introduce myself. Professional courtesy, one coach to another. I run training exercises for tank crews, which is essentially coaching at a slightly higher stakes level. The implied threat was crystal clear. Josh's face went green. Maya watched her father systematically dismantle each boy's sense of security. This wasn't just about protecting her, it was about demonstrating that their little kingdom of teenage intimidation was built on foundations of sand. And you, Colonel Rodriguez said, focusing on Tyler, your mother runs the school board, correct? Tyler nodded miserably. Excellent. The school board and I will have much to discuss regarding anti-bullying policies and their enforcement. I have some thoughts about how civilian institutions might benefit from military-style discipline protocols. Brad, apparently realizing that his friends were being systematically neutralized, tried to play his trump card. Sir, with all due respect, my father owns the largest business in Cedar Falls. He has a lot of influence in this town. Colonel Rodriguez smiled, and Maya suppressed a shudder. She'd seen that smile before, usually right before her father delivered devastating news to overconfident subordinates. Your father owns a car dealership. That's impressive. Tell me, does he hold any federal contracts? Federal contracts? Brad repeated, clearly confused by the direction of the conversation. Government vehicles, military fleet sales, anything involving federal procurement processes, Colonel Rodriguez explained patiently, because I have some interesting connections in military logistics. It would be unfortunate if concerns about his son's behavior reached the wrong ears in procurement circles. The threat was subtle, but devastating. Maya realized her father was playing chess while these boys were still learning checkers. Every move they'd made to establish dominance had given him leverage over their family's livelihoods. Sir, Marcus finally spoke up, his voice barely audible. We're really sorry. We didn't mean anything by it. We'll leave Maya alone, we promise. Colonel Rodriguez considered this for a moment, then shook his head slowly. I'm afraid apologies and promises aren't sufficient. See, gentlemen, you've demonstrated a pattern of predatory behavior. My daughter mentioned someone named Sarah Jenkins, who was apparently subjected to similar treatment. This suggests systemic issues rather than isolated incidents. They exchanged panicked glances. Their past victories were now being used as evidence against them. Colonel Rodriguez pulled out his phone and placed it on the table with deliberate precision. The device's military-grade case and encrypted communications array made it clear this wasn't standard civilian equipment. I've been recording our conversation, he announced matter-of-factly. Audio and video, naturally. Military habit. Always document important tactical briefings. The boys stared at the phone in horror, realizing that their already desperate situation had just become exponentially worse. Now, Colonel Rodriguez continued, here's what's going to happen. Each of you is going to contact Sarah Jenkins and offer a sincere, public apology for your past behavior. You'll also apologize to Jessica. I believe she was mentioned as another victim of your hospitality. And you'll apologize to any other students you've targeted using similar tactics. Tyler started to protest. Sir, we can't just— You can and you will, the colonel interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that brooked no argument. Because the alternative is much less pleasant for everyone involved. Maya watched her father establish complete control over the situation with surgical precision. This wasn't just parental protection, it was a masterclass in strategic thinking and psychological operations. Furthermore, Colonel Rodriguez said, you'll be contributing to a scholarship fund for military families attending Cedar Falls High School. I'll let you work out the details with your parents, but I suggest starting with meaningful amounts. Character-building contributions. Brad's voice cracked as he asked, how much is meaningful? Oh, I'll leave that to your family's consciences, the colonel replied with false generosity. Though I should mention that I'll be taking a personal interest in Cedar Falls High School's anti-bullying initiatives. Regular visits, volunteer coaching for the disciplinary committee, that sort of thing. The implication was clear. Colonel Rodriguez would be watching them indefinitely, ready to intervene at the first sign of backsliding. Josh raised a trembling hand like he was in class. Sir, what if we just stay away from Maya? Would that be enough? Colonel Rodriguez shook his head. Son, you're thinking too small. This isn't just about my daughter anymore. This is about transforming Cedar Falls High School into an environment where every student can feel safe, where military families who've already sacrificed so much for their country don't have to worry about their children being targeted by local predators. Maya felt a surge of pride at her father's words. He was using this incident to create lasting change, not just immediate protection for her. I'll be establishing a mentorship program. Military veterans working with students who demonstrate leadership potential. And I'll be identifying students who might benefit from learning about discipline, respect, and service before they graduate and enter the real world. The boys realized they were being conscripted into their own rehabilitation. There would be no escape, no waiting for things to blow over. Colonel Rodriguez was restructuring their entire senior year around character development. Additionally, Colonel Rodriguez said, I'll be organizing some educational field trips to Fort Carson. Nothing builds character like experiencing military discipline firsthand. I think you boys would benefit enormously from a weekend of basic training exercises. Marcus looked like he might faint. Basic training? Modified for civilians, naturally, but comprehensive enough to provide proper perspective on hierarchy, respect, and the consequences of poor decision-making.
Maya had to bite her lip to keep from smiling. Her father was essentially sentencing these bullies to military summer camp, disguised as character-building volunteer work. "Now," Colonel Rodriguez said, standing to his full height, "let's discuss the immediate logistics. You boys are going to clean up this meal, apologize to the McDonald's staff for any disruption, and then you're going to drive directly home. No stops, no discussions about what just happened, no attempts to coordinate your stories." He pulled out a tablet device that Maya recognized as military-grade tactical equipment. "I'll be tracking your movements until you're safely home. Consider it protective surveillance." The boys nodded frantically, apparently beyond caring that their every movement would be monitored by military intelligence assets. "One final point," Colonel Rodriguez said, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "If any of you even thinks about retaliating against my daughter, against the students you'll be apologizing to, or against anyone else who might be perceived as connected to today's events, well, let's just say that tank in the parking lot represents a very small fraction of the resources at my disposal." The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Maya realized her father had just declared a personal war on bullying in Cedar Falls, with him as supreme commander and these 4 boys as his first prisoners of war. "Do we have an understanding, gentlemen?" Colonel Rodriguez asked. 4 heads nodded vigorously. "Unstanding. Maya, are you ready to go home?" As they prepared to leave, Maya noticed that the entire McDonald's was watching them with rapt attention. Stephanie, the teenage employee, gave Maya a subtle thumbs up from behind the counter. Other customers were still filming, their phones capturing every moment of what would undoubtedly become local legend. Colonel Rodriguez moved toward the exit with Maya beside him, but then paused and turned back to address the boys one final time. "Oh, and gentlemen, welcome to the real world, where actions have consequences and bullies meet their match."
The walk to the tank felt surreal. Maya could hear excited chatter from other McDonald's customers as they emerged, phones clicking with photos and videos that would be circulating on social media within the hour. Her father moved with the same measured pace he'd used entering the restaurant, completely unbothered by the attention they were attracting. "Dad?" Maya said quietly as they approached the massive vehicle. "This is kind of overkill, don't you think?" Colonel Rodriguez smiled. A genuine expression this time, warm with a paternal affection rather than tactical intimidation. "Sweetheart, in military operations, there's no such thing as overkill. There's only open fire and mission accomplished." He helped her climb up onto the tank's hull, then followed with the easy familiarity of someone who'd done this thousands of times. Maya noticed that other customers were keeping a respectful distance, though she could see several phones recording their departure. Besides, her father continued as he settled into the commander's position, "Sometimes, a show of overwhelming force prevents the need for actual conflict. Those boys will never forget today, which means they'll never repeat their behavior." Maya settled into the tank's interior, surrounded by the complex array of controls and displays that represented the pinnacle of American military technology. She'd been inside military vehicles before, but never under circumstances quite like these. "How did you even get permission to bring this here?" Colonel Rodriguez began the startup sequence, his hands moving over controls with practiced efficiency. "Trading exercise," he said with a slight grin. "Community relations. Civilian interaction protocols, tactical deployment in non-combat environments, all perfectly legitimate educational objectives." The tank's engine rumbled to life with a deep, powerful sound that Maya could feel in her bones. Through the periscopes, she could see the boys from McDonald's standing at the restaurant windows, still looking shell-shocked from their encounter. "Will you really follow through on all those programs you mentioned?" Maya asked as they began moving through the parking lot. "Every single one," he confirmed. "I meant what I said about transforming the school environment. Military families face enough challenges without having to worry about their children being targeted by local bullies. As they rolled through Cedar Falls' quiet streets, Maya noticed people stopping on sidewalks to stare and wave. Some took pictures. Others just watched in amazement as an M1 Abrams tank cruised past their suburban homes, like the world's most overpowered school bus. "You know, this is going to be all over the internet by tonight," Maya said. "Good. Let it be. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to make it impossible for people to pretend it doesn't exist." They passed Cedar Falls High School, where a few after-school activities were still in session. Maya could see students and teachers emerging from buildings to watch the tank roll by, their faces filled with wonder and confusion. "Dad," Maya said, "those boys mentioned something about what they did to Sarah Jenkins and someone named Jessica. It sounds like this has been going on for a while." Colonel Rodriguez's expression darkened. "Which is exactly why we're not just addressing your situation. Bullying is like insurgency, Maya. If you only treat the symptoms without addressing the underlying causes, it just goes underground and gets worse." They turned onto their street, passing the neat rows of civilian housing that Maya was still learning to call home. After 17 moves, it was hard to believe any place could be permanent. But something about today's events made her think Cedar Falls might actually become the stable home her father had promised. "I'll be honest," Colonel Rodriguez said as they pulled into their driveway. "I've been worried about this move. Civilian schools can be challenging for military kids, especially in small towns where everyone's known each other forever." Maya thought about the day's events, from the intimidation in the parking lot to the rescue by tank. "I think I'm going to fit in just fine," she said. Her father laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the tank's metal interior. "Something tells me you're right, though I suspect your social dynamics are going to be quite different for most high school students." As they climbed down from the tank, Maya could see neighbors emerging from their houses, drawn by the unmistakable sound of military hardware in their quiet subdivision. Mr. Henderson from next door approached with the kind of careful respect civilians typically showed to military equipment. "Evening, Colonel. Everything all right?"
"Just picking up my daughter from school," Colonel Rodriguez replied, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. She had some orientation activities with her new classmates. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly, clearly processing the implications. "Well, I hope she had a productive day?" "Very productive," Maya confirmed, unable to suppress her grin. As they walked toward their front door, Maya reflected on how completely her life had changed in the span of a few hours. This morning, she'd been just another military brat starting over at a new school. Tonight, she was the girl whose father had rolled up to McDonald's in a tank to deal with bullies. "Dad," she said as he unlocked the front door, "thank you for everything." Colonel Rodriguez paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Maya, one of the most important lessons I've learned in the military is that you never leave a soldier behind. That includes my daughter." Inside their house, Maya's phone immediately began buzzing with notifications. Text messages, social media alerts, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Word was spreading fast about the day's events. "I should probably check these." She scrolled through the messages. "Oh wow, Emma wants to know if that was really you in the tank. And there's already a video on TikTok with 2 million views called Tank Dad Saves Daughter from Bullies." Colonel Rodriguez shook his head with amusement. The information age. In my day, stories like this stayed local gossip. Now they go viral before the participants even get home. Maya found a message from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Sarah Jenkins. I saw the video. Thank you." The simple words carried so much weight. Gratitude, validation, hope that someone had finally stood up to the boys who'd made her life miserable. "Dad," she said as she showed him the message, "I think you started something bigger than just protecting me." Colonel Rodriguez read the text, his expression growing thoughtful. Sometimes one act of courage inspires others to find their own strength. Maybe Sarah will come forward now. Help us make sure this kind of behavior doesn't happen to anyone else. As evening settled over Cedar Falls, Maya realized that her life had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just another military kid trying to fit into civilian society. She was the girl whose father had made a statement so dramatic, so decisive, that it would reshape the social dynamics of her entire school. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Maya felt ready for them. She had allies now, other students who'd been afraid to speak up, parents who'd been unaware of what their children were facing, teachers who'd lacked the authority to address systemic problems. And she had her father, Colonel James Rodriguez, who'd proven that sometimes the best way to handle bullies was with overwhelming force and the absolute certainty that their behavior would not be tolerated. Cedar Falls High School was about to discover what happened when military precision met teenage politics. The tank in their driveway served as a permanent reminder. In this town, bullies had officially met their match.
6 months later, Maya Rodriguez stood at the podium in Cedar Falls High School's auditorium, looking out at an audience that would have been unimaginable on that first day when 4 boys had cornered her in the parking lot. The spring semester awards assembly was packed with students, parents, teachers, and several military personnel who'd become regular fixtures at school events. "When I first arrived in Cedar Falls," Maya began, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone system, "I thought I was just another military kid starting over at a new school. I had no idea that one afternoon at McDonald's would change not just my life, but our entire school community." Laughter rippled through the audience. The tank incident, as it had become known, was now part of Cedar Falls folklore. The original TikTok video had been viewed over 50 million times, spawning countless reaction videos, news reports, and even a segment on a national morning show titled Dad of the Year, when military training meets high school drama. Maya spotted her father in the third row, wearing his dress uniform and beaming with pride. Beside him sat Principal Martinez, who'd initially been concerned about the irregular intervention methods, but had since become one of Colonel Rodriguez's biggest supporters. "The mentorship program established by my father and the other military volunteers has transformed our school. We've seen bullying incidents drop by 90%. Academic performance has improved across all grade levels. And most importantly, students who once felt powerless now know they have advocates who will stand up for them." In the audience, Maya could see Sarah Jenkins, who'd transferred back to Cedar Falls after her family learned about the changes taking place. She was sitting next to Jessica Martinez, no relation to the principal, who'd found the courage to speak about her own experiences after the McDonald's incident went viral. Near the back, looking uncomfortable but present, sat Brad Hutchinson and his 3 former friends. They'd completed every requirement Colonel Rodriguez had established, including the scholarship fund, the public apologies, and a summer camp experience at Fort Carson that had apparently been both humbling and transformative. But the real change, Maya said, came from all of you, students who decided to speak up instead of staying silent. Teachers who implemented new support systems, parents who started difficult conversations about respect and accountability. And yes, sometimes it took a tank rolling into a McDonald's parking lot to get everyone's attention, but the lasting change came from the community's commitment to doing better. The applause was thunderous. Maya had been elected student body president in a landslide victory, running on a platform of zero tolerance for intimidation that resonated with students who'd felt voiceless for too long. After the assembly, Maya found herself surrounded by younger students, particularly girls who looked at her with something approaching hero worship. One 8th grader named Emma, not the same Emma who'd warned her about Brad, tugged on Maya's sleeve. "Is it true your dad really drove a tank to McDonald's?" she asked with wide eyes. "It's true," Maya confirmed, "but the more important part is what happened afterward. The tank got everyone's attention, but the real work was building systems to make sure no student ever has to call for help like that again." Colonel Rodriguez approached, having finished his conversation with several parents who were interested in expanding the mentorship program to other schools in the district. "Ready to head home, Madam President?" he asked with a grin. As they walked through the hallway, Maya noticed the changes that had become so normal, she sometimes forgot how different things used to be.
Posters about respect and inclusion lined the walls, a peer mediation center operated during lunch periods. Most importantly, there was an energy in the building. Students who walked taller, smiled more freely, engaged more openly with each other. "You know," Maya said as they reached the parking lot, "I never thanked you properly for what you did that day." Colonel Rodriguez paused beside his regular pickup truck. The tank had been returned to Fort Carson after serving its psychological operations purpose, though it still made occasional appearances at school events. "Maya," he said seriously, "I've received medals for actions in combat zones, commendations for strategic planning, recognition for training excellence, but nothing I've ever done has made me prouder than watching you transform a moment of crisis into lasting positive change." Maya hugged her father, thinking about how much had changed since that terrifying afternoon when 4 boys thought they could intimidate the new girl. The story had spread far beyond Cedar Falls, inspiring similar programs at military communities across the country. Colonel Rodriguez had been asked to speak at education conferences about innovative approaches to school safety. But for Maya, the real victory wasn't the viral fame or the policy changes or even the elimination of bullying at her school. The real victory was simpler. She'd found her voice, her community, and her purpose. Besides, Colonel Rodriguez added with a mischievous smile, "I have to admit I enjoyed the tactical challenge. It's not often you get to deploy an M1 Abrams tank against teenage bullies. The precision was actually quite impressive." Maya laughed, remembering the looks of absolute terror on Brad's face when her father had emerged from the tank. "I still can't believe you got permission to do that." "Well," her father said, "technically the training exercise was approved for community relations and non-traditional deployment scenarios. The fact that it coincided with your need for parental support was just fortunate timing." As they drove home through Cedar Falls, Maya reflected on the journey from that first day of school to now. She'd learned that standing up to bullies sometimes required more than just personal courage. Sometimes it required the support of people who refused to accept that intimidation was just how things work. Her phone buzzed with a text from Brad Hutchinson. "Congratulations on the election, you deserved it." Maya showed it to her father, who nodded approvingly. "Character development takes time, but it's possible for anyone willing to do the work."
That evening, as Maya worked on homework in their kitchen, she could see through the window to where their neighbors' children were playing in the yard. The Hendersons' daughter was wearing a t-shirt that read, "Tant Burl's Neighborhood," a piece of merchandise that had somehow emerged from the viral story. Colonel Rodriguez was in his home office, video conferencing with educators from 3 different states who wanted to implement similar mentorship programs. What had started as one father protecting his daughter had evolved into a national conversation about school safety and community responsibility. Maya's laptop chimed with the new email. The subject line read, "Thank you from another military kid." The message was from a student in North Carolina whose school had just started their own Veterans Mentorship Program inspired by the Cedar Falls model. "I just wanted you to know," the email read, "that your story gave me the courage to speak up when I was being bullied. My dad isn't a tank commander, but he's Army too, and now our school has veterans volunteers just like yours. Thank you for showing us that we don't have to face bullies alone." Maya smiled, thinking about how one afternoon's crisis had rippled outward to help students she'd never met in places she'd never been. Her father had taught her that leadership meant taking responsibility for others, but she was learning that sometimes leadership also meant having the courage to ask for help when you needed it. Her phone rang, a FaceTime call from Emma, her lab partner, who'd become one of her closest friends. "Hey, future President of the United States," Emma said with a grin. "Ready for tomorrow's student council meeting?" "Always," Maya replied. "What's on the agenda?" "The usual. Budget approval for the peer mediation program, planning for Military Appreciation Week, and Brad wants to propose a school-wide community service requirement for graduation." Maya raised an eyebrow. Brad's transformation had been remarkable, but she was still occasionally surprised by his initiatives. "Community service requirement? Apparently, your dad's summer camp experience was pretty impactful," Emma said. "Brad wants every senior to spend at least 40 hours volunteering with local veterans organizations or community outreach programs."
It was fitting, Maya thought, that the boy who'd once terrorized other students was now advocating for mandatory service to others. Colonel Rodriguez's approach to character development had been more effective than anyone had anticipated. As she ended the call and returned to her homework, Maya felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She'd not only survived the transition to Cedar Falls High School, she'd helped transform it into a place where every student could feel safe and supported. Outside her window, the sun was setting over Colorado's mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. In a few months, she'd graduate and head to college, West Point following in her father's footsteps, but she knew that Cedar Falls would always hold a special place in her heart. It was the town where she'd learned that sometimes the best way to handle bullies was with overwhelming force. But more importantly, it was where she discovered that lasting change came from building communities where everyone looked out for each other. Maya Rodriguez, the girl whose colonel dad had rolled up to McDonald's in a tank, had found her home. And Cedar Falls had found its conscience.
The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.